All right, I have Justin on the show today to help us understand about how to clean the air that we breathe in as I get more and more into chronic inflammatory response syndrome and overloading of on our liver of toxins and just how we might struggle with feeling better even though we think we're doing all the right things and we still are struggling. So I reached out to Justin who works with Jaspr and we're going to just dive into what is how do we clean our air and why should it matter and how we can be our best self in the future and not be sick and struggling. So thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Debbie. I appreciate it.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, your why. I was loving people to share what you do and why do you do it.
Absolutely. I am the what we would call the customer experience
Mm.
coordinator here at Jasper. So basically, my role is just ensuring that, the day-to-day stuff with the company is running well, and that involves everything from a lot of it is the customer service side. So just making sure that, people have their questions answered, and we sure do get a lot of them, which is great. People are very curious, and this is a
Mhm.
growing space. So we're very happy to, educate and provide guidance on all things air quality and air purification. Honestly, whether someone's buying or not, we just want to make sure we get the education out there. So making sure that people's questions are being answered, that, of course, those who have Jaspers, if they have any technical questions or things like that, we're helping them out, troubleshooting where applicable, just making sure that some of the big tasks and big projects are moving along, that, our warehouses are well stocked with inventory and that everything is moving along properly. So that's what I do here. And just a little bit of background of where that stemmed from is that I've actually been in the what you could call the environmental consulting and testing space for over 8 years. So our founder, his name is Mike, and he's been in the space for a long time. He actually came up with Jasper from his background in wildfire restoration. Basically, he would be on sites where there were very heavy, fire damages and also things like water damage and mold remediation, and he would be there to help clean them up. And what he was finding was that, after the work is done, you of course need to, like as far as the remediation, the physical part, you need to clean the air from all the contaminants that have built up. And he was finding that, of course, the commercial grade industrial air scrubbers that were used are very effective, but they're not very practical for a home setting. And on the flip side of that, the products that were available for home usage were unfortunately not very effective at cleaning the air. So what he wanted to do was find a nice medium where it was essentially a product that could clean the air very well, but also be applicable for the home. Not be very loud and very ugly, want it to be beautiful and modern and do a good job of keeping the airspace clean. And that's really where Jasper was born. So he was working on this for a long time. And when I started working with him, again, he had this company that was all about air quality consulting and testing. That meant we would go into homes that had not like the big damages, but people were feeling sick and they weren't sure why, and it was a lot of uncertainties. And so what we would do is test the air, take things like mold samples, dust readings, VOCs, all this manner of particulate, send stuff to a lab, and then get a report back and write it for the customer. And then we'd say, hey, here's what we found with your air, X, Y, Z. These are the problems. Here's what we recommend. And then they'd kind of go off from there. And so it made a very natural transition into Jasper, which is ultimately a solution side of things. It kind of streamlines a lot because instead of doing a bunch of testing, you could, do these solutions. Here's a solution for you. And it doesn't mean it has to be Jasper, but a lot of times in air purification in some manner really helps to improve things. So that's a little bit about my background and what we do at Jasper and why this kind of stuff is so important to go forward with.
Well, I'm discovering more and more people struggle with chronic fatigue, unexplained weight gain, memory, brain fog, gut issues, SIBO. I mean, the list goes on, autoimmune issues. And it's really looking at the root cause approach of what else is going on, what's causing this, and work backwards. And I think a lot of people just treat all these symptoms and not really understand what is it coming from. But also, I'm finding it's more accumulation of toxins that are overloading. I always used to talk about the stress beaker and all these stressors, but it's now also that stress beaker. Chronic stress is also chronic toxic exposure in our environment that we don't really have any clue about. Do you find that just why you're growing and why the field's growing. There's more toxins overwhelming us.
Absolutely. And it's really a core aspect of what we try to educate and discuss with customers and non-customers alike. And it all
Mhm.
comes down to your home being your place where you should be, in theory, detoxing. We're exposed to so many chemicals and pollutants and all these things that attack ourselves and our bodies. But the problem is that much of this is actually coming from your home environment. And you think it's kind of the inverse, that like it really shouldn't be the case. We think of pollution as the stuff you see outdoors, cars
Mhm.
and factories and smoke and smog and all these things. But you don't really think about what's inside your home. But as it turns out, not only do we spend the majority of our time, it's, roughly for most people, 90 to 95% of our time is spent not necessarily in our home, but in an indoor space of some kind. But it's also that indoor air in general, whether it's your home, your office space, your kids' school, can be 5 to 10 times dirtier than the outdoor air. And so a lot of that is just because buildings are built with energy savings in mind, makes
Mhm.
sense. But the problem with that is that it's trapping all these pollutants that are inside, that they form inside and then they can't go anywhere. You're effectively living in like a Tupperware container. And so from that, it means all these things, these VOCs and mold and particulates are building up and they have nowhere to go. So they go into us. We inhale them and we, in a sense, become an air filter because you're taking in all these contaminants there. And so the problem, of course, with that is that you're not allowing your body to de-stress and detoxify itself. You're sitting in a home that has a lot of mold, a lot of chemicals, and all it's doing is continuing to go after your body, and there's no outlet for it. So that certainly makes sense to what you're saying, that we're seeing this accumulation of just all these things because of the environments that we are basically boxing ourselves into.
Well, and plus people working at home more often, and if their house is moldy, but most people workplace, I didn't realize I had a water leak frequently in my fitness studio that I owned for 10 years, and I worked in from 5 a.m. till 7 at night. That it didn't really dawn on me that, oh, that's mold, ceiling tiles stained, there's some water damage, that we don't always think about all these things that happen around us, that they're actually, we're breathing that in, and that's going to impact our health, especially if you have more genetic susceptibility to having more reaction than another person.
For sure. A good analogy that you could really take home from this is that air is to us what water is to fish. And so what we
Mm.
mean by that is that when you're in a bad airspace, you may feel that something's off, but it's hard to pinpoint exactly what's going on. And what I mean
Yeah.
by the fish example is when there's like a toxic spill, let's say, or some kind of like a gas leak or, like petroleum into an ocean area. And the wildlife that's in there, it's living in the water. It doesn't know that it's been affected by pollution. So it doesn't say, oh, I need to leave and go somewhere else. It just stays in that environment and then it gets very sick or it dies. And so for us, it's kind of the same thing with that we exist in air. So it's very hard to kind of pinpoint and say, I know exactly what's wrong. And we're probably more aware than animals for sure, but it's still very
Mm.
difficult to make an informed decision and definitive action and say, okay, I need to do XYZ to get out of this. So that's kind of why this ends up happening, is because we're so unaware of what's going on a day-to-day basis. And it's because so many of these things, like, even with the mold situation, like you saw, you notice water damage on the ceiling tile, but you don't necessarily put together that, oh, this means that there's likely mold that's making me sick. And for most
Mhm.
people, it's kind of the same thing, that are even less, sort of in the space than you would be, Debbie, where they're not really thinking about those things that they can't really see, but it's the invisible stuff that's going after us all the time. So it makes perfect sense to why that'd be happening.
I think it's also, as I research this area, more so that it's accumulation. If it's just like the cherry on top, when you finally have this breakdown and burnout of your body systems and create what we say metabolic chaos, because it's just you only can tolerate so much, I would think, on top of people living a crazy busy lifestyle. They're stressed all the time. They just have poor eating habits. We're in a sympathetic overdrive. So we become less resilient. And so I would think we're more susceptible to getting ill from all these exposures.
I would, yeah, I would very much agree. And for sure, I think a lot of it is, has to do with lifestyle changes as well. It seems less and less frequent that these days we just go outside and go into nature. I mean, that in itself can be such a huge detox from so
Mhm.
much of the stuff that we face. But, with being in a very hyper-connected world, which is great for information and building business and connections, but the other aspect of that is that it's very hard to kind of switch it off and it's hard to
Mhm.
just kind of detach from it. So you're absolutely right that in this kind of the standard lifestyle that we have now, you're overloading yourself and it just, eventually gets to a point where you just can't handle it anymore. It's just too much. But by then it's often there's been a lot of damage that's been done already.
So going into more specific on mold and mold spores, there's reasons for that with moisture, talking about poor airflow, how things are built. You're talking about mold on wood, drywall, paper, carpet, dust, I had written down, and leaks. I mean, there's so many different sources as well as food we're eating too. So where do you find if it's more mold, and we can go into other sources of toxins, how they get to be in our house, and how do we prevent having it be a problem to cause damage to my health?
Sure. So there's a lot that can be discussed on mold. And the thing that should be known is that number one, mold is everywhere. So it's found outdoors, and it's going to depend on the environment that you're in. But there's always going to be mold that's outside.
Mm.
And what'll happen is anytime you open your door or your window, even just to step outside or get the newspaper or whatever it may be, or get a package, you open the door and mold is going to make its way inside. And from this, every single house will have mold to some extent. So this is a very
Mhm.
normal thing. Most of the, in a lot of cases, it's not a huge deal. As if the home is kept well, especially if you have a good airflow or ventilation and you don't have crazy humidity in the home, it's not a factor really to have some spores that come inside. They're very normal, and we would be exposed to them when we go outdoors as well. So it's common to have mold in pretty much every home. But the some of those other factors, like I was mentioning, if you have really high humidity in your home, and if you have really poor airflow, like the air just does not exchange well, it's very stagnant. And then, of course, if you have an acute problem, like a water leak where there's a specific moisture source, that's where you have a chance for more mold to develop, and what we would call the mold load inside the home is going to increase pretty significantly because now you're supplying it with all the sources that it needs to grow, which are high humidity, direct moisture, lack of ventilation. And then, of course, like you were saying, the building materials as well. If you have anything
Mhm.
porous, which is, carpets, couches, upholstery,
Mhm.
curtains, drywall, all these things are what would be considered organic from a mold growing perspective. So mold can grow on all these items here. And even inside, your walls, like your insulation and the wood framing inside. So there's so many aspects of the home that then can become kind of a catalyst for mold to grow. And then over time, you all of a sudden have, this pretty large amount of mold that can be present inside your home. And if it's not dealt with, if you're not dealing with the sources there, then it can last for pretty much, theoretically forever. If you're not really taking care of it, it's always going to be at a high level inside the home. And then, of course, that's going to affect you as the resident that's inside there.
And if you're sleeping in a room, say 8 hours, you're in one space, it can obviously cause more problems than if you're just in and out of a room. That when you're sleeping and inhaling that all night long, is that more of a priority to address that area where you sleep or spend the most time in?
Absolutely. So this is a really important topic that we discuss in terms of, when you're sleeping, the only thing that you're doing is breathing air. So
Mhm.
of course we eat food during the day, we drink water, we do other activities, exercise, but at nighttime, that's supposed to be your body's recovery time. And the only thing that it's doing is breathing, inhaling and exhaling. So the important thing is that, of course, that air that you're breathing in is as clean as it can possibly be. When you add mold to that mix, what's happening is that overnight, even if you don't really realize it, you're not really going to be conscious of it, your body is fighting a constant battle because it's taking in so much more particulates, so many more spores than it's used to, than it should be. And,
Yeah.
you're stationary, you're in your bed. And if you have a lot of mold, I mean, a bed is a very soft thing. It can very easily get into the pillows, into the mattress, and the comforter and the sheets. So you're basically allowing yourself to be kind of enveloped in a moldy environment. Think about that for the years and years and years that you might be in the same bedroom. That can cause a
Mhm.
lot of issues for oneself, for sure.
And a lot of people don't know they have mold. So I guess step one, how do you know if you might have mold unless obviously if you see it, but signs and symptoms of mold exposure, do you have anything you share with that? And then how we test for it?
Sure. So there's a few main things that you could pay attention to. So the primary ones would be allergy-like symptoms, and
Hmm.
this would be more so as well when you're inside the home. Like a really big trigger, and this is very easy for anyone to really, if they think about it, that you can really focus on. If you find that you are feeling better when you're outside of the home versus inside your home, that's usually a pretty key indicator that something
Mm.
inside the home is amiss. Because
Yeah.
realistically, if you're in a good state and your home is healthy, you should feel the same inside versus outside. So if
Yeah.
you are feeling that you are sneezing more, if you're coughing more, if you have runny nose or itchy eyes or sore throat, for some people, you may get hives, you may get rashes, reactions, but all of these kind of acute symptoms, they're happening inside your home more often, and you find that they dissipate when you go outdoors. That's a pretty good sign that there is very, very likely elevated mold inside your home. Some people will have more severe reactions. And this is where if you're really finding, like, for example, trouble breathing or pretty significant asthma related issues there, for sure, that's where you'd want to go see a specialist, like maybe a pulmonologist, someone that specializes in the lungs, because they could actually take a look and really see if there is actually mold presence. And they'd be able to see if there's a
Mm.
mold activity that's inside your lungs, or possibly doing a blood or a urine test. But for the most part, you as the average person, those are kind of the common symptoms that you would find inside your home when it comes to mold, that those are what will cause those symptoms to come up if you have elevated mold. So that's the main stuff that you would look for. The other things are just being, aware of if, for example, if your humidity is really high, like if you're saying, you know what, it really feels humid in here, it feels very hot, very sticky. It's probably a good idea if you have a humidistat to check it. Like if you have some kind of a, maybe on the furnace or the HVAC system that can tell you in real time. If you don't, you may want to consider, especially if you're in a humid climate, getting a dehumidifier that has a digital readout, because this will, of course, show you what your actual humidity reading is in real time. And the magic number to pay attention to is 60%. So what's been
Mm.
found is that when your relative humidity in your home is 60% or higher, although it's not a guarantee, the potential for mold to develop goes way, way up from there. So if you can be below 60%, that's a very key threshold. Like that's a very easy win that you can achieve, and it might involve a couple dehumidifiers if you have a larger space or humidity
Mm.
problems. But that's a really good number to shoot for. Ideal humidity would be around 40 to 50%. You don't want to get
Okay.
too dry because there's a lot of other issues that can come from
Yeah.
that. But in that range is very optimal to ensure that you don't have a better chance of mold to develop inside your space.
So a lot of people that live in Texas is where you are, Florida, they're very humid conditions. And I know a lot of clients I'm talking to, they have their air conditioners on all the time, they have moisture, and it's just a mold infested area. I think it just invites mold when you're living in those climates. In Hawaii too, I guess is mold probably there.
For sure, yes. That's one of the trade-offs with any being anywhere tropical, is that the
Yeah.
chance for mold does become a lot higher indoors if you're not taking care of your indoor space. And
Hmm.
for sure, Florida, we do see this in Texas a lot. I mean, pretty much anywhere really on the East Coast is very prone to getting mold, and that goes all the way up, from the Northeast all the way down to Florida there. Certainly the central parts of the country, like as I said, Texas, we do see these issues as well. Um, One thing that we should always mention too, and I know that you're in San Diego, where generally it's a pretty favorable climate from a humidity perspective. But you can still get mold problems indoors, and actually they can be directly related to the HVAC system. And one of the problems can be that, number one, like if you have just a faulty system where there's a leak, that of course can be a way that mold develops too. But we've actually seen this happen is that, a very common situation is let's say the air conditioning, it'll only kick on once you get above a certain temperature. And otherwise, for the most part, it's going to be off. So, outdoors it hits a certain amount, and then indoors, your thermostat's reading a certain temperature. Okay, AC kicks on, it reaches the temperature that you want, and then it goes off. What can happen is that on and off switching of the fan and the AC inside the unit there, that can cause condensation. So moisture can actually build up on the inside of the air conditioner there, and that in itself can not always, but sometimes lead to mold activity in a place you'd never really think of it because you think, oh, outdoors is dry, it's all good, I don't have to worry
Mm.
about mold inside. But this is a situation to be aware of because it can happen, and of course, it's in the HVAC, it's being spread through your vents, and all of a sudden there's mold that you never would have expected traveling through your home.
Imagine, I mean, I guess you imagine it because that's what you guys do, but just have an air conditioner that's blowing out mold into your air. So that's seems so, it makes sense that it happens probably so easily,
Exactly.
sadly.
On almost every home that has AC, if it's going through that cycle, there is the possibility that it can be sending mold throughout the home in that way. It's a very easy vessel for it to do so.
Ugh. So I know you guys will talk about your product and how it cleans air, scrubs the air, but if people have mold on their counters or in the spaces, I know I've talked to Dr. Donald Dennis of micro balance solutions for good ways, but do you have any favorite ways to clean mold if you see it?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few recommendations that you can really take home. A lot of it will depend on the amount. So this is where we say, you use your kind of eyes and senses on it. Like, if you're really reacting and you're seeing that there's, for example, water leaks and such, you want to get them addressed likely by a professional. Same goes for if you have a lot of visible mold. Like if you're seeing that, all of a sudden there's mold on a lot of your drywall and like really a lot under your sinks or different areas, it's probably a good idea to have a professional company come in because they can properly take care of it.
Yeah.
For the small amounts, like if you're, seeing a little bit on the baseboard, and a very common one, of course, would be in the shower, like in the grout, we often see that. Um, you can actually use, there's a few solutions you can use, and it really depends on what kind of products you like. But there are some pretty good non-toxic solutions that work well for mold. One really good one that we like to recommend is hydrogen peroxide. Hydrogen peroxide is great because, and I use this in my shower at home actually quite a bit. But you put it into a spray bottle. You don't have to mix it, so don't dilute it, don't mix it around. Like any peroxide at the pharmacy will do just fine. And you spray it on the grouting and the mold there. Let it sit probably 10 or 15 minutes, and then you take a soft bristle brush and you can scrub it off. And the cool thing is that when you use the peroxide, the byproducts of it are really just water and oxygen. So it's a very harmless, very overall non-toxic solution, but it does work very well at breaking down the mold. And if you spray it, for example, in like a shower setting on the grout, you should often hear it kind of fizzing a little bit if you listen closely. And it actually is working to break down the microbial activity. You take your brush, you scrub it off, and then you can kind of wipe it down. And that will help a pretty good amount with, again, like, when it's a small amount of mold. I wouldn't suggest doing that if you have like an entire section that's ravaged by mold. Get a professional for sure. But for small areas, that can work quite effectively. And it's a very easy, simple, safe solution that you can take on.
You'd have to probably wear a mask and gloves to not inhale it because you're releasing those mold spores, I would think.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's a good point for sure. So a mask and gloves will definitely help. They'll
Yeah.
be your friends here. And then yeah, once it's done, I mean, likely if it's in like a shower setting, you'll probably see it come back later on, but it's still a good thing to tackle from time to time. Like it's definitely a good idea to make this a part of your somewhat regular house cleaning routine.
Hmm. So I really wanted to learn how to clean my air. So we're talking about cleaning our water, having filtered water, right? And now it's like, what? The air we breathe in, shouldn't that be clean? And if we're not able to live outside, as I try to do as much as I can in the daytime, why we moved here, but in your house, as we are speaking about, especially where you sleep, where you work, where you eat, how to clean that air to better air quality. Tell us a little bit again of why is it so important to have clean air? Because people probably think it's not necessary, I would think.
Yep,
What's the
good point.
argument?
For sure. Well, here's one of the main ones. So we kind of liken this back to air being one of the main pillars of health. Ultimately, as
Mm.
far as the consumables, we consume food, which is roughly 3 pounds a day. We drink water, which if someone is healthy, it's ideally if you can get around a gallon, that's great, or at least half a gallon. And air, which we're not drinking or eating, but we're consuming or breathing in. Often we're taking 20,000 breaths per day, and that's every single day. And if you stop doing that, of course, you'll die. You can
Yeah.
go 3 weeks without food. You can go 3 days without water. You can go about 3 minutes without air, kind of the rules of three. So it's critically important that that air that you're constantly breathing in is in a good state. And when we say a good state, we mean that it's low in mold, low in particulates, low in chemicals. And especially, as we were talking earlier about sleep, it's hugely important there because, again, when you're sleeping, the only thing that you're consuming is air. That air is the only
Mm.
thing keeping your body alive when you're in a state of unconsciousness throughout the night. So it's hugely important that that air that you're breathing in is clean and it's not having a lot of stuff that your body's then having to fight off. Because then all of a sudden, you're waking up not in a good state because your body has been trying to just get a state of rest, but it can't do that because your lungs are having to deal with that much more particulate and all these things that you're having to contend with instead of just a clean airspace. So that air that we live with inside of our homes every single day, the cleaner it is, the better it is for your body. And from mentioned earlier, it's a huge step in being able to detox. If you can't, we just really want to
Yeah.
reiterate you can't detox your body if your home is a state of toxicity. If your home is detoxed, your body has a much easier time to detox as well.
So I'm smiling because I've been doing this deep dive. If you listen to any of my rabbit hole solo podcasts on my show, I've done so many lately and just the importance of liver detoxification and order of operations and what happens while we sleep. And while we sleep, we're supposed to detox. We're supposed to heal and repair, and the housekeeping's supposed to come and take care of us while we're sleeping if we allow ourselves to get good quality deep sleep. So if you think about how if we're not able to breathe good, clean air, we're not sleeping properly. So we're not getting quality sleep. So we're not getting deep sleep. And then we're not getting the clean oxygenated air to help all the processes that are happening while we sleep. So it makes sense how the body all works and it needs oxygen to do all that.
100%. And I'll give you an analogy that really resonates quite well. You can think of it as when you are going about your day-to-day routine. So, from the morning when you get up and the work you're doing and the normal stresses that we all face, and
Mm-hmm.
of course being outdoors and whether there's pollution or not, coming inside or being in your car, you are effectively looking at yourself as a cup. And by the time you reach your evening and you're going to be going to sleep, for most of us, our cup is pretty full. And this is very
Mm-hmm.
normal because we take on stressors day to day. This is a part of life. The important thing is then at nighttime, what you want to do is empty that cup. If you're in a space where the air is very dirty, not only are you not emptying your cup, but it's now overflowing. And you're
Mm-hmm.
sleeping at night in this overflowing cup state when it should be emptying. If the air is much cleaner in your space and what we would call your sleep sanctuary, that's really what your bedroom should be. It should be a space of sanctuary and rest. If the air here is good, your cup is now emptying out. And so you wake up in the morning with an empty cup. And this is what we want.
Mm-hmm.
Because then again, during the day, that cup will fill up, very normal, and then you empty it at night. And that's the cycle that we
Mm-hmm.
want to be seeing. If you can't empty it at night, you can't be detoxing, it's just that much harder to go about your life.
And that's another huge clue of when people are struggling with their energy levels in the morning. It might not just be, did you take magnesium and take melatonin or something to help your sleep? But it's, to me, I always think when they're waking up, especially between 1 and 3 a.m., is Chinese medicine clock, it's liver time and it's busy detoxifying. But that's another great symptom. If you have poor air quality, you wake up and you just feel worse, and that makes sense too. It's just how important it is to have good quality sleep, not just internally but external environment.
100%. And something actually that's very exciting, and this literally has just been coming out in the past week or so. There's a study that we're going to be diving into for sure at Jasper that's been showing that lower if you have lower particulate levels in your airspace, so like the fine particulates, um, whether it is mold or any other kind of contaminant, lower particulates is apparently leading to lower blood pressure as well.
Mm.
So, if someone has high blood pressure and they're finding that they're having, trouble sleeping or they're waking up not feeling well, there could be that direct link. So we're very intrigued. Like as I said,
Mm.
this is a very, very new thing, but we're very intrigued to look into that as well because it just kind of feels like one of those other, missing pieces of the puzzle that if you figure it out and you're aware of it, that's one more difference maker that you can really be looking at.
Okay, but if you're breathing, it's all about the air you're breathing in, how that impacts you. And so blood pressure, I keep thinking of nitric oxide production and how that might, the air that you're breathing in, if it's toxic air, how that would impact the nitric oxide. I'm reading Dr. Nathan Bryan's book on nitric oxide, the role of it, and how important it is the blood pressure and cardiovascular system. And so it's interesting because it's vasoconstriction versus vasodilation in blood vessels. So
Hmm.
something to think about putting that together. So going into the Jaspr product. Now, I've been looking at different ones at conferences, ECU, molecule, different ones. Talk about what Jaspr is and how it works differently than others. And what are we cleaning?
Sure. So we like to call Jasper the more of an air scrubber for your home instead of an air purifier. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason for that is we really want to make the distinction that air purification, air purifier traditionally is kind of thought of as, like a small device that you put in your bedroom, or sometimes you'll even see them on like a counter space or your desk. And it's this device that cleans the air inside of the room that you're in. Um, but with the air scrubber, it's kind of likened back to I was mentioning a lot earlier about Mike's background and our founder in wildfire restoration, where they would use those industrial air scrubbers, which were ultimately really good air cleaning machines. But the issue is that they are not practical for a home because they take up a ton of room and they're very ugly and very loud. And so the thing is, with the Jasper, it's more of an air scrubber for your home, meaning it moves a lot of air, like a lot more air than most other purifiers will do. But it also can do so quietly, because that's the important
Mm-hmm.
thing too, is that, a huge part that is often overlooked with detox is sound pollution. You don't want to be in an environment where there's constantly loud grating noise. And so
Mm-hmm.
if we had, an air purification machine that is always very loud and abrasive, sure, it'll help clean the air, but I mean, that's not really conducive to a nice living environment either. So you really need to have the balance of something that runs well, but is also quiet and can move a lot of air. And so that's what the Jasper can do is it can move a lot of air, even at the lower speed compared to a lot of other products at their higher speeds. So that's one main distinction.
And
Um,
that's probably just to butt in there,
sure.
but that would be because I would go think why. And I would think that you're trying to sleep in parasympathetic rest and digest and detox nervous system. If I have a loud noise, like the jackhammer down the street all day today, if that was going on all night, that would keep me in sympathetic fight or flight. So I'm not able to sleep, get rested, and get into that deep sleep stage that I'm missing all that healing and repair and detoxification. So the type of machine you have in your room is, yes, makes sense. You need it quiet and relaxing.
Exactly. And you can kind of look at it almost like a white noise because it does
Yeah.
depend what speed you put it on. Like a lot of customers actually like putting it up, maybe one or two fan speeds at night because they don't mind like a fan noise and it's a very, smooth blended fan noise. But
Mm-hmm.
it also means it's going to be turning the air over more frequently. And so that's often where they report a better sleep. And then for others who like really, really quiet, no problem. They put it on the lowest speed. It's whisper quiet, but it is still having a pretty good effect on cleaning the air. So that is certainly a big factor that we wanted to consider is, sleep is such an important aspect of your home. It's not just during the day you want your air cleaned, it's all the time. So you need an item that's conducive to that constantly.
So ideally, we're having our air scrubbed during the day if you're working there, living in that space with the windows closed. And then, especially when we're sleeping at night, because that's where you're spending the most time. But tell us a little bit, what are we often breathing in that we don't get outside if I was sleeping in the forest? What's
For
different
sure.
inside?
Absolutely. Well, a lot of the stuff that you're breathing indoors, For the most part, you could still find outside, but it's the concentrations are higher, and you're just exposed to it more often. So, for example, the mold stuff is there is mold outdoors, but there's also wind and there's weather patterns, and you're often not going to be in a spot that's constantly molding and you're inhaling a bunch of mold if you're sleeping outside. Indoors, where your home is very airtight, that mold that's in there is not going anywhere. It's going into you. So you're becoming the filter to really take it on. There's also going to be things like PM 2.5. Now, PM 2.5 is basically fine particulate matter that's in the 2.5 micrometer size range. So this is pollen, smoke, pet dander, even things like skin cells, kind of a nasty one, but unfortunately it's a big part of air is insect fragments too. It's the
Oh.
stuff that would be outdoors, but when your home is very airtight, that stuff is just kind of floating around your airspace, and that's sort of part of the amalgamation of PM 2.5. So all those fine particulates there. Um, a big one now that you won't find outdoors, or realistically you shouldn't, but you do often find inside is VOCs. VOCs being volatile organic compounds, which is really any kind of chemical compound in the airspace there. Now, some of them come from natural sources for sure, but there's a lot of man-made or synthetic ones as well. And where these could come up is if you recently painted inside your home, or if you just did a renovation and there's the kind of the glue or the epoxy on your flooring, or putting your baseboards or your cabinets up. If like a really main one that comes up is often is formaldehyde from new building material there. Formaldehyde is a very crucially important VOC from the sense of like it's often found, but it's can be a pretty big health detriment, and that's certainly one that you don't want to be breathing in
Mhm.
constantly. So VOCs are one that you will often find indoors, but depending on the ventilation inside your home, it could be building up to a pretty severe level. If you have good ventilation and good airflow and air exchange, usually your VOCs won't be as bad. So that's a really important thing from an indoor air perspective is when you can get ventilation, definitely do so.
Mhm. Well, as I said before, we're seeing so many more people with chronic illness, chronic fatigue, chronic inflammatory syndrome, fears, asthma, allergies. Is it often, have you tracked any correlations with improved air quality for those people struggling with these different inflammatory illnesses? Do they see a change? Have you ever done some research?
Mhm. For sure. I mean, I will say in terms of kind of directly related to SIRS, not specifically, but we have definitely seen a lot of the kind of related issues that come up. Like just for example, if someone has asthma or if someone has seasonal allergies or these other kind of symptoms that are going on, and they're typically exacerbated by the environment, we very much so find that when you have cleaner air, these symptoms go down by quite a bit. We've had a
Mhm.
lot of cases. There's actually one gentleman in particular that really stands out where he had a basement office and he could not use it because there was mold. And he knew that there was elevated mold, or he actually had it tested and air sampling verified that there were elevations of mold spores, but he couldn't use it. He was very reactive to the mold, so he would always feel very sick, very off, like all the symptoms, the itchy eyes and the runny nose and the coughing and the sore throat. He started using a Jaspr in the basement space, and he wrote back to us and he said, I can use my basement office again. He was thrilled because it was taking out all of those triggers for, his symptoms and his allergies. And so we see stuff like this all the time where once you start really cleaning your air with something that
Mhm.
works, it makes a huge impact
Yeah.
on yourself, and it also improves your mental state too because you're feeling like there's hope. You're feeling like there's something out there that you can actually use to improve your state.
Well, it's definitely one tool in the toolbox to clean up our environment. So it's not, we can't just, do this and fix all our problems. So people should understand that we still have to do the vagal nerve stimulation, the relaxation work, the morning sunlight, getting outside, eating the anti-inflammatory foods, and really working on yourself. But this makes sense that this is really something we should have a part of our program to improve our quality of life as we age. Because if I want to avoid cognitive health, dementia, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, as I'm focused on chronic diseases, it's that sleep quality. And if I just that one area of sleeping, I think, whole household, yes, but for sure my sleep environment would be my personal goal to do whatever I can do to improve that quality of the air. Makes
100%.
sense.
And actually to emphasize that point for you, we last year did a sleep study. And this was, we love talking about this. So what we did was we gave 100 Jaspers away to people that tracked their sleep with the Aura ring. And this was, it
Hmm.
wasn't like because we had a, brand thing with Aura, it was just to keep it simple, keep the variable the same. So we said, we'll
Hmm.
just make it for Aura users. And the goal was what they were going to do was track their sleep for 1 week without the Jasper in their bedroom. Then it was put the Jasper in the bedroom for 2 weeks, and then it was remove it and track their sleep for one more week. So it was a total of 1 month. And what we
Mm.
wanted to see was what kind of improvements are there in terms of their sleep quality when the Jasper is in the bedroom versus outside. The numbers that we found, just to give you the specifics, were for the time to fall asleep. It was 5 minutes faster with the Jasper than without the Jasper. So cool. It's a nice little win for sure, quick win. What we were really finding, though, the key point was people were sleeping half an hour longer at night with the
Wow.
Jasper versus not having Jasper in their bedroom. So having it on made a huge difference in the amount of time that they were sleeping. And then as a
Mm.
final point to that, with the, for everyone that was tracking their sleep, the average deep sleep score that's used by Aura, so really to track not just, your kind of sub-level sleep, but your really deep sleep, not just the surface level, the deep sleep score was up 18%. So not only were
Wow.
people sleeping longer, they were sleeping deeper and waking up feeling better, more rested because they were entering that much, deeper restorative phase of their sleep
Hmm.
when Jasper was inside
Mm.
the bedroom. And the
That's
really
good.
cool thing too that you can also kind of look at is from a um, not necessarily a quantitative standpoint, but more qualitative, is a lot of people were mentioning that their snoring improved. We actually had couples who were sleep divorced for years. They said they started using Jasper in the bedroom and the snoring stopped. And all of a sudden they were sleeping with their partner again after being apart for years and years. So that's one of those aspects where it kind of goes to the mental, part of it where it's not like a physical sort of checklist that
Hmm.
you're marking there, but it's you're now this is just one more thing that's less stress.
Yeah,
You're relaxing again with your partner. So all these things add up to make a
they
huge
do.
impact with
Yeah.
your sleep and your detoxing and your overall life.
Well, it's almost what we said. We had that beaker of stress and the toxins that are accumulating. And now we need to have a different cup, for like our bank account, our savings and withdrawals. And now we need more of the cup that, how much can we add to it to fill up that beaker of positive resiliency tips or solutions? Something, I have to think of that. But we need to add more in the positive side, more deposits, less withdrawals.
Yes, for sure. And the great thing that you can really take home from this too is that it's it's pretty much the easiest way that you can make a change right away to stay healthy. It's you're not having to do strenuous exercise, you're not having to change your diet and shop for all these foods or
Just
get a
preach.
big water system and filter that. It's literally just plug in, start cleaning your air,
Mm.
and immediately the effects become known. So it's a
Yeah.
very simple, no commitment really way to actually start making a big change in your life.
Mm. So talk a little bit more about the competitors to help people understand the differences, Jasper air scrubber versus what are the other ones? You got molecule, I would see ads for, or just a plain humidifier. Who are your competitors and what do you think is who needs this product versus a different one?
Sure. So, I mean, some of if you're talking comparisons, some of the main ones would be, Molecule is for sure a big one. Air Doctor comes up a lot.
Yeah, air
There's
doctor.
IQ Air as well. Those are probably the kind of the main ones that we're seeing there. And I'll preface by saying none of these are particularly bad devices from
Hmm.
an air cleaning perspective, but
Yeah.
where we can really emphasize the differences with Jasper are number one is the overall design quality and build. So Jasper is
Mm.
actually made of steel. Most other brands out there are made of plastic. We really wanted something that is, not just looks nice, but is actually built well and lasts a long time. And our goal is ultimately longevity. The last thing we want is a device that breaks down after a few years and
Yeah.
you have to, replace it for a new one and you're creating a bunch of waste. We wanted something that's metallic, that's built sturdy, and so that's where the Jasper stands out. The other thing is that to get into a little more of the nitty-gritty specs, the intake of the Jasper. So this is where the air is actually coming inside. Because basically any purifier, you'll have a fan, you'll have your filter. The fan is pulling air through the intake, and that means it's passing through the filter, and then it leaves the the outtake, kind of you could look at as like the supply vent of the device, and that's releasing clean air into the space. So Jasper's air intake is a perfect cylinder, meaning it's 360 degrees all the way around, meaning you can put the Jasper anywhere, even if it's right against the wall or a corner, and it's going to be effective. A lot of the other products that are out there, like for example, the IQ Air or an Air Doctor, the air intake is only on one or two sides, meaning you have to be more strategic. It generally has to sit kind of further into the room to be effective. It's harder to kind of tuck away. So that's a huge factor because you don't want something that's kind of cumbersome and in the way of your day to day. Like it's not practical to have a device in the middle of your living room. So having it sit aside but still be just as effective is very key. And then probably one of the biggest differences that really where we stand out from is our filter size. So the Jaspr filter itself is actually 4.5 pounds. And it's perfectly cylindrical like the device itself, meaning there's more surface area because cylinders have more surface area than a flat filter. When you have more surface area, naturally, there's more room for particulates to be captured. But our filter being 4.5 pounds really differs because most other products out there, the filter itself is maybe half a pound. So you're
Mm.
getting a lot more durability, a lot more strength and size and cleaning power with that Jasper filter compared to the other ones there, meaning that it's going to be effective throughout the lifespan of the filter. And then what we also have just as a nice feature that really makes it crystal clear what's going on is there's a big screen on the top and it shows you your air in real time. So this
Mm.
removes all the guesswork. You don't know like, hey, is my air actually dirty? Is it working? You can see on the screen the number that represents PM 2.5, which is your fine particulates. So you
Mm.
always know how polluted or how clean your air is inside your home, and that gives you some reassurance that your Jasper is doing what it needs to do to keep your airspace clean.
And if it's you turn it off or not off, but how do you have not EMF while you're sleeping? Does it connect?
Yeah, great question. So we're very conscientious of this, and this is actually why the Jasper does not have any Wi-Fi and it has no Bluetooth.
Mm.
So from a radio frequency perspective, in terms of EMF, that is effectively zero. Naturally, there's a little bit of magnetic field from the motor, and of course, this is unavoidable. It's always going to have a little bit. But we have done measurements with multiple readers like EMF readers, and what we've found is that generally once you get around a foot from the Jasper, that magnetic field drops to around zero. Same
Mm.
thing for the electrical field. Again, of course, you plug it in, there's going to be a little bit of electric field, but when you get around a foot from it, from the outlet and from the Jasper there, that electric field component is also negligible. It's basically at a zero amount, like relative to just a normal, room that you have in your home where there's, anything else that's going on. So it doesn't stand out in any way from an EMF standpoint. So that basically means if EMF is a concern, I would just say don't sleep with the Jasper right by your head, of course. But if you just have it kind of in the corner of your bedroom, no concern whatsoever with EMF. And overall, it's a very low EMF product.
Hmm. Good. So how long does it comes with a filter? How
Mhm.
long does that usually last to
Yes,
be
great
replaced?
question. So the filter, we've made it very simple. It's an all-in-one filter design, and there's three layers to it. There's
Mm.
your pre-filter, which is for large dust and debris. So like let's say if you have, like pet hair or dander or dust mites, that's the kind of stuff that gets trapped in there. You have the main part is the HEPA filter, of course, which is for mold, all defined particulates, smoke, pollen, that kind of thing. And then there's a equally important layer that's your carbon. And your carbon layer is for VOCs and odors and chemicals that are
Mm.
inside the airspace. Now, the way that this carbon actually works, it's called activated carbon. Once you have opened it up to the airspace, it is continuously working to capture those chemicals and odors that are inside your air and your environment there. And it'll have tend to have depleted around the 6 month mark. It's basically it's not like a linear drop off. It's basically it works, it works, it works, and then it just stops working. That's how
Mm.
activated carbon is. So for that reason, the 6 months is the standard replacement cycle.
Mhm.
It's to ensure you have optimal performance at all times with your Jasper because that way you're always having, some carbon functionality. And it's also to ensure that the HEPA layer is not getting too clogged up. Everyone's
Mm.
home will be different. And a lot of factors go into it. If you have pets, if you have carpeting, how much do you cook? How's your ventilation, size of your home? But some people will
Mm.
find that it's really caked with a lot of stuff after 6 months. Others, it may be a bit less. But that's just why, with the carbon and the HEPA, they're just to ensure it's not too clogged up. 6 months is your standard replacement cycle there.
Mm. And when you said it has the number showing on the top of it, does it show you then how dirty your air is or how much crap it's collecting?
In a sense, yes. So what you'll see, there's a number, there's a digital readout, and it'll basically there's 3 digits. Most of the time, if your air is in a stable state, and especially if you have your Jasper running, it's usually going to say something like 004, maybe 005.
Mm.
What that number refers to is the mass of the fine particulates in your airspace. And again, the fine particulates is a pretty broad term. That's all kind of the total amalgamation of all those fine particles that are kind of together, and it's representing the mass of them. So a low number is good. That means that your air is in a pretty stable and clean state. But what you'll see is if you're doing something like cooking or some kind of activity that's rapidly changing the amount of particulates. For example, if you have like a cast iron pan and you're cooking a steak on your stove, that releases a lot of particulates, in addition to smelling great, but there's a lot of particulates that come out of that. And so if you have your Jasper in your home, you're going to see that number very quickly go from, let's say, 005, up to probably 50, up to 100, probably 200 plus. And there's a color indicator that goes from green to orange to red. So when it's running at a
Mm.
red state, it means that, that there's a lot of pollutants in the air from, in this case, from the cooking. But the best feature is that the Jasper will automatically change the fan speed. So what it's going to be doing is by default, it runs at the lowest speed that it needs to. But it doesn't always have to be running high because again, that can be loud. So
Mm.
most of the time it runs at the lowest speed. But when you introduce a sudden change in particulates, the fan ramps up by itself, which is great because you don't have to touch it. And again, this is where we say there's no guesswork. So you let your Jasper do its thing, it ramps up, you'll see the number go up, and then it starts to go down. And especially once you're done the cooking, you've removed the source of pollutants and particulates, then your Jasper goes back down, back
Mm.
to its quiet setting there. So this way you'll know that it's doing the job it needs to do inside your home.
So, question if you have it, I'm going back to the bedroom. If I sleep with the windows open and have the Jasper in there, does that make a difference? Do you have to have your windows closed?
For the most effect, having windows closed would be better. But we do like to make the distinction that, getting direct ventilation is good from an indoor air perspective. Although, of course, it depends on the day. If there's a really bad wildfire and the AQI
Mm.
levels are very high, please don't open your windows. I mean, that's, you want to
Mm.
keep it closed for sure. But if the outdoor air is fine, and especially if you're in like a more of a rural environment, it's definitely great to have windows open from time to time because you get your direct fresh air, you help dilute carbon dioxide, you bring in more oxygen, that's great. We would just suggest paying attention to your Jasper screen. Like if it's
Mm.
ramping up constantly when the windows are open, there could be a lot of pollen or stuff coming in. So just something to be aware of because it would be reacting to that. But for a lot of the time, if you have, windows open sometimes and the Jasper's running, that can work well together. What we would recommend is when you do close the windows, like let's say they're open during the day and you close them at night, or vice versa. When you close the windows, that's when it's a good time to manually run the Jasper higher because it's going to give your air a deep clean. So now you're closing off the environment. It's easy for it to focus on the space and really help pull in a lot of the air that otherwise would be continuously coming in from the outdoors. So you give your air a deep clean, then you can set it back down to, the lower speed. And this is often called smart mode because that's where we'll auto adjust. So those are just some of the main tips that we suggest for using the Jasper to the best of its abilities.
So, especially people that are in forest fires, as you mentioned, having the windows open and hit fire, but being in San Diego, I know a lot of people that lost their house in Pacific Palisades fires and just the fires in general. I would think, I don't know, it's like mold almost. That how can you fix it if you've had smoke damage in your house? Your
Mhm.
house hopefully stayed, I don't know if it's good or bad. If houses that stayed together and they moved back into their houses that had fire damage, how similar is that to having mold damage and breathing in poor air quality?
For sure. Well, a lot of the effects could be similar, if not worse, just because often, like when you've had a smoke damage or fire, damage situation, there's often a lot more acute problems that are really concentrated inside the home. So
Mm.
a big thing would be if let's say there was a fire nearby, but your home is still standing, fortunately, so there's no structural damage. But you've had a lot of smoke come in, or maybe there's some discoloration or soot that you're noticing on the walls and such, or materials inside. There's a few main recommendations that we would suggest that you take. Um, First ones really would be depending on the severity, and it can be tough to talk about, but it might be easier to get rid of some items. Like if you really had a lot of smoke damage, you may want to consider getting rid of your rugs, probably changing your
Hmm.
curtains. Maybe if you have like a couch, your mattresses, your sheets, probably a better idea to get rid of those. At the very least, you'd want to have a very thorough cleaning done of the materials themselves. And then, of course, the main thing is that you want to clean your air as well, because what is often found is that even if you've had let's say you had a wildfire that was a relatively short period of time, and then you have, your increases in smoke, your increases in particulates, and then the fire is calmed and it dies down and it's gone. The lingering contaminants from the fire can actually last sometimes for months. Even when there's no more source of it, it stays in the air, it stays in the environment there. So it's very important that you don't look at it as, oh, well, there's no more smoke, there's no more fire I can see, therefore it's safe. Not really
Hmm.
the case. So the important thing is, aside from cleaning and getting rid of what you need to in your home, that's when you want to focus on cleaning your air as well. Getting the ventilation once the outdoor air is good and using a very good air cleaning device to really scrub the air, scrub all those pollutants and contaminants so that you can be living once again in a safe and healthy environment in your home.
So it's pretty much same for mold, because that's the same response pretty much I hear for mold. Mold, smoke damage, get rid of anything that had
Mhm.
covered in mold and exposure to mold. It sounds pretty much the same. You just clean up your environment, and then making sure if you do just wash stuff that you clean your washer, because your washer's
Yes.
dirty and has mold too. So
That's
it's a
that's a very overlooked aspect, but
huge.
yes, definitely try to clean your washer as well, because that's going to be taking on all that mold that you're putting stuff into it to clean. But yeah, be aware of the
The
washer
washer's
itself
dirty.
too.
Because I learned that from Dr. Donald Dennis. He works microbalance labs, and they have a solution you can put in your washing machine to clean the mold in it. So people trying to get rid of mold from their clothing, I bet your washing machine's just as dirty. So you got to think about that. Lots to think about. So I know we're out of time already. It just goes so fast. So much to talk about in this area. I find it so fascinating. But what are some tips if besides doing the Jaspr to improve air quality right now in our home environments?
Sure. So some of the main ones would be, and I know we've been talking about this a lot, but ventilation
Yeah.
is really key. If you want good airflow, you want good air exchange, and you can actually
Mm-hmm.
achieve this in a couple of ways. I mean, the simplest one is just open a window because that will directly bring in fresh air, especially if you open across the home to get a cross breeze. That will really be the best way
Mm-hmm.
to ventilate. One other way you can actually do this, and this is more of a often energy effective solution, is to get an air exchange device. Usually these would be called an ERV, which is an energy recovery ventilation unit. So this is built into your HVAC. A lot of new homes actually have these by default, but older homes, no problem. You can get them installed. And this is a way of bringing in the direct fresh air and helping to dilute and ventilate and take out the CO2. So and it's going to be more energy efficient because you're not opening windows, so your HVAC is not fighting with trying to maintain a temperature inside when it's very different outside. So ventilation, air exchange. Also, though, a simple way to do that is simply using your bathroom fan more and your range hood. Um, just by using these devices, you're also helping to pull out air and helping to dilute, some of the stuff that builds up inside your home. And there's a really big misconception with your bathroom fan that you should only use it during your shower time. They'll take a shower, turn it on, shower's done, okay, turn it off. Don't do that. You really want to leave it running for a good period of time. Honestly, an hour at least after your shower, it's key because you're helping to remove all that humidity that builds up.
Mm-hmm.
Even in a 5-minute shower, that's basically like
Yeah.
you've just thrown a bucket of water onto your bathroom floor. Like all that water has to go
Yeah.
somewhere. So when you run the fan for a longer period, it is helping to pull the humidity out. And that's going to help with potential mold, preventing mold. So it's a lot of these very small things like ventilation and using the fan and keeping humidity low. These are all things that don't have to really cost anything, but they'll make a big impact in your home, aside from actually using an air filtration device as well.
That's great tip. What was the device you said? The ventilation air exchange? What did
Yeah,
you
so
say?
it's called an ERV. Sometimes they're called an HRV. So it's Energy Recovery Ventilator Unit. If it's an HRV, and it'll depend what climate you're in, because sometimes that will be the default for an HVAC. The HRV
Mm,
is Heat Recovery Ventilation Unit. Ultimately, they're
mm.
doing the same thing to exchange the air, but it does depend what kind of climate and environment you're in, because sometimes you need one that also helps to regulate humidity and temperature as well. So that would be the difference. But the goal is the same thing with them.
Great tip. Well, tell us where to find more and learn about Jasper, and we'll put all the links in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. So our spelling is Jaspr, so there's no E. So
Hmm.
our website is just very simple. It's jasper.co.co. You can find us on Instagram as well. It's just at JasperCo. And those are really our main places. So on the Instagram, we often post, little experiments and demos
Yeah.
with the Jasper, and often a lot of, mini rants from Mike. And then on our website, you can see all the product specs. You can see, the how it works, the fan speeds, the noise level, anything you want to know about Jasper, you'll be able to find it there. And of course, you can always reach out to us by email, team@jasper.co, and the website's where you can order a Jasper for yourself.
Yeah, definitely on my list. And I must say your Instagram is very good, very educational. So people can for sure hit subscribe, follow you guys there because it was really good information and good insight, stuff you don't really think about. And you need to. So thank you. Thanks for your time today and all your great information and putting up with all my questions.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks so much, Debbie.